Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and today we'll be doing Chapter 2 of National Suicide Military Aid to the Soviet Union by Anthony C. Sutton. You can get this book on Amazon by going to the show page, clicking the cover of it. This one's $17, and if you want the free version, click the link above it. It gives you the PDF version. Now, what we do here is all for free, love of Jesus Christ and Holy Mother Church. And this way we can give you unbiased, hard-hitting, and sometimes touching the third rail topics that no one wants to touch. And this is one of them. And to the veterans of the Korean and Vietnam War, sorry about this, but it's gonna really make you upset because we're going to learn the truth about what happened.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember not the war so much. It happened when I was a little kid, and I wasn't watching television. I was involved in kids' things, but I remember all the controversy, post-war controversy, and it was in the papers every day what the Vietnam vets had suffered and how many of them just had to psychologically forget about the war and then come back at it 10, 20 years later. And it was a horrible war. Everything like the government conducted the war in the wrong way. I mean, it's like if you're going to fight a war, you fight the enemy. But no, you could only fight in Vietnam. You couldn't cross the border. And so the enemy was like given the advantage, intentionally given the advantage. And then all these drugs are spread among the troops down there. And why didn't the government do anything about that? And it turned out over the years it was the CIA who was actually pumping drugs into the guys while they were over there, and then their commanders were taught to take them in the field. And many, not a few GIs went into the bush with their lieutenant and came out without him because he was just given directions to engage them in a kind of warfare that would have led to their death. The top military brass was lying about how many people were being killed and what's the purpose of this war. And it seemed, the left exploited it to break down any kind of respect for authority, government in the United States, and the whole culture of the U.S. was like snapped in two between those who are in favor of the war, against the war. You're going to be upset if you're a vet or you knew someone who's a vet in these two wars, because not because we're going to upset you, but it's very upsetting to find out how Freemasonry was totally behind these wars, and they weren't intended to be won, really. They were intended to destroy Christian culture and make more satanic the popular culture, and by attacking the things that held us together as a nation, held us together as a Christian nation, and it was a terrible abuse of government. So let's get into the facts and how this portrayal of the Masonic lodges of America was so central to these wars. Where does Sutton pick up the thread, AJ?
Yeah. He starts off with a quote from Maurice Stans, former Secretary of Commerce, 1972. History has shown that where there is increasing trade between countries, there is tendency towards increasing understanding. Unfortunately for Maurice Stans' credibility, no historian or politician has ever produced evidence that trade necessarily or automatically lends to increased understanding. Why not? Because no such evidence exists. While it is true that peace encourages trade, this does not mean that trade encourages peace. In fact, trade has often enabled aggressive countries to go to war. Witness the aviation gasoline and steel scrap shipments to Japan, and Standard Oil's agreements on hydrogenation patents with IG Farben of Germany prior to World War II. The blunt truth is that trade with the Soviet Union from 1917 to the present has built the free world, an enemy of the First Order. Moreover, the technological component of this continuing trade enables the Soviet Union to pursue its programs of world conquest and more to the point at the present stage of history, to supply the North Vietnamese invasion of the South. It costs the American taxpayer 80 billion a year to counter the Soviet threat.
So let's remember now that Sutton, this is one of Sutton's first books. He wrote this during the Cold War, so before 1989. I don't know if you could cite the actual year. There's the original copyright in the book so people understand, because the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. And so when you hear the phrase, for those of you youngsters,
Let's see here. Let's see. Did not put a date in this book.
okay. So, but I gather from the tone of it that's definitely written before like 1980.
Yeah.
Sounds like 1976. The
Oh,
Vietnam War ends in 76.
yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Now the chart illustrates the increasing in trade between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1963 to 1971. Now in the PDF version, the chart, I don't believe, yeah, the chart is not there, but in the book form, it is there. And what he means the chart illustrates an increase in trade between the United States and the Soviet Union. Also, it figures in the casualties killed or wounded in the Vietnam are superimposed on the U.S. trade figures.
And is there a correlation? I mean, as one rises, the other rises?
Yeah, massive amounts. The last year of JFK's life, they barely even traded anything. Maybe 5 million, uh, $5 million of stuff to the Soviet Union.
And then the next year?
Next year is at 12 million.
This is under Johnson now, who takes over after Kennedy's assassinated. And then the year after that?
15 million.
Then the year after that? Just read it.
Just 18 million. Wait, yeah. So we are about, okay, let me get this right here. Okay, we have 5 million, about 5 million. Plus, looks like maybe, I would say probably $30 million worth of a wheat deal.
Mm-hmm. We started selling them wheat too.
Yep. So by 67, we are over 10 million. Then 68, we go up about almost, it's hard to read, it blurs it out. But at 1969, we were past $150 million in trade.
150 million, that's a 10-time fold increase, 20-fold over Kennedy. And that's just by 67.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a policy of Johnson to start trading with Russia.
And by 1970, we are nearing almost $200 million. And what was what they only say was 60,000 dead in Vietnam? In 1970, it shot up way past 60,000.
Yeah, but remember the word casualties is not dead. Casualties is anyone injured and dead.
Yeah.
And a lot of people came home of Vietnam maimed because medicine had now arrived at a point where most battlefield injuries, which were minor, wouldn't lead to your death. So a lot of people came home maimed. And I remember the shame of these guys. They hid themselves. Then after about the year 2000, you didn't see Vietnam vets anymore. I don't know what happened to them, or maybe they melted back in society, but the ones who had maybe got prosthetics for their arms, but you should be able to notice who was a Vietnam vet from the fact he was injured.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't stop at 200 million, did it?
No. That's all they could get out of the documents that were given to
Okay.
them. So obviously the claims that increasing trade is accompanied by increasing understanding are false. A more accurate characterization appears to be that increasing trade is accompanied by increasing conflict, i.e., misunderstanding. The concept of peaceful trade with communist countries assumes some positive causal link between trade and peace. It is a false assumption. On the contrary, the figures demonstrate that there may well be some relationship between trade and casualties.
Now, when Sutton wrote this book, he was still writing under the understanding that Russia was our enemy and we had nothing to do with them. He hadn't yet done his book on how Wall Street bankers had built Russia up
Mm-hmm.
and actually financed it, and that the communist system in Russia was actually a Masonic system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was actually controlled financially out of New York City. He hadn't yet come to that understanding. So he started to notice, like, well, if they're our enemy and they start killing more of us, the more supplies and trade we do with them, it's almost like they're under our control and we're promoting them to kill us. And that just didn't make sense. Logically, history, the 20th century is hard to understand until you realize there is an organization of evil men that's out to destroy humanity, and they run the banks in New York. Until you understand that, nothing makes sense. It seems like everyone's acting irrationally. And Sutton latches onto this and shows you how it's just unbelievable, the amount of cooperation between the US and Russia. Doesn't make any sense. And so what more does he discover?
The overlooked causal link, that is, the relationship between trade and casualties, is contained in one word: technology. From the Soviet viewpoint, the benefit of US-Soviet trade is the acquisition from the United States of the technology required for building and maintaining the Russian economy. This subsidized technology is the tidal basis of the Soviet military structure, as is proved by the Soviets' own statements. See Chapter 4. The armaments produced by Russia's American subsidized military industrial complex are used to promote Soviet global expansion.
So the Soviets, people want to talk about how the Chinese, we opened trade with China and they stole our technology and they made themselves stronger with it, but they didn't give up communism. Well, the Russians did this 20 years before the Chinese invented it. It's the old Russian game. And they did the same thing. They opened trade, they stole our technology, and they built themselves up. Except the Russians, well, they're more militant than the Chinese, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. There are 4 logical steps in this process. Step 1 and 2 have been fully demonstrated in the author's 3-volume study, Western Technology and the Soviet Economic Development. Trade between the United States and the USSR with its key technological component. 2. Consummate buildup of the Soviet military-industrial complex. 3. Use of the U.S. subsidized Soviet military-industrial complex to provide inputs for Soviet armaments production. 4. Use of these armaments against the United States and its allies. This is the trade technology armament war cycle. It suggests that the peaceful trade promoted by successive administrations should be more realistically be entitled war trade. If any of the links in this cycle can be broken or shown to be false, the argument would collapse. However, no link is demonstrably false. Indeed, there is evidence that the trade casualty link is stronger than even the most pessimistic have envisaged. The information that would have enabled the trade war cycle to be widely known at an earlier date has been deliberately classified and blacked out. See chapter 3 of this book.
So he actually found out that the government not only was promoting technology transfers to Russia, but was concealing that they were doing that at early stages to show you that well, to hide the fact that they were doing it. And and this is what he finds so shocking, and it should be so shocking to us. It's proof that the Masons aren't in control of some society or only in control of some presidents. They've been in control of the entire federal government and most of the major national economy for at least a century now. And it's all designed not to promote civilization, but to destroy civilization. Because the people behind it are not Christians, they're Masons, and Masons are well, we Catholics would just put a finger on it. They're servants of Satan.
Mhm.
They're servants of destruction. That's why Catholic civilization flowers in art and masterpieces of architecture and absolutely beautiful people whom we call saints. But Masonic civilization doesn't flower that way. It's like a skunk cabbage. I don't know if you have skunk cabbage out in Kansas, you probably don't, but it's a plant that when it flowers, it produces the most horrible stinking odor of corruption. And all the wars and deaths in the 20th century, all the hundreds of millions killed with abortion and contraceptions, this is the stinking flower of the Masonic Lodge. And this is what their ideology leads to.
Yeah.
So let's get into the actual tech transfers. What did Russia obtain from the West that they used to kill men in Vietnam and Korea?
Yeah. The Soviet version of Soviet intent. The Soviets have always been explicit about their intentions. So was Hitler in Mein Kampf. Objective truth has no place in communist morality. Any statement that will advance the cause of world communism is regarded as truthful, acceptable, and perfectly moral. As far back as 1919, Zinoviev put it well in a statement that applies to the Viet Cong as much as the revolutionary Bolsheviks. We are willing to sign an unfavorable peace. It would only mean that we should put no trust whatever in the piece of paper we should sign. We should use the breathing space so obtained in order to gather our strength. Congressional Record, Volume 74, page 7049.
So they're completely dishonest, just like the Masons. It's the exact same morality.
The immoral dogma, which is moral and communist ideology, was emphasized by Joseph Stalin. Words must have no relations to actions. Otherwise, what kind of diplomacy is it? Words are one thing, actions another. Good words are a mask for concealment of bad deeds. Sincere diplomacy is no more possible than dry water or wooden iron.
No, it's absolutely true. You have to, if you're going to make a treaty with the enemy, first you have to determine is he going to keep it. Otherwise, it's pointless.
So, in 1955, the staff of the U.S. Senate Committee on Judiciary examined the Soviets' historical record and unexpectedly, in the light of the foregoing statements, came to the following conclusion. The staff studied nearly 1,000 treaties and agreements, both bilateral and multilateral, which the Soviets have entered into not only with the United States, but with the countries all over the world. The staff found that in 38 short years since the Soviet Union came into existence, its government had broken its word to virtually every country to which it ever gave a signed promise. It signed treaties of non-aggression with neighboring states and then absorbed those states. It signed promises to refrain from revolutionary activity inside the countries which it sought friendship and cynically broke those promises. It was violating the title of the first agreement it ever signed with the United States at the very moment of the Soviet envoy, Litvinov, was putting his signature to that agreement. and it is still violating the same agreement in 1955. It broke the promises it made to the Western nations during the previous meetings at the summit in Tehran and Yalta. It broke land lease agreements offered to it by the United States in order to keep Stalin from surrendering to the Nazis. It violated the Charter of the United Nations. It keeps no international promises at all unless doing so is clearly advantageous to the Soviet Union.
In other words, they're complete and utter liars. I remember an old Chinese man once, and I said, who had fled China, I said, tell me something that I really would need to know if I ever was dealing with the Communist Party in China. He goes, you only need to know one thing. Everything that comes out of their mouth is a lie. From the moment I said, how do you know what is a lie and what's not? He says, as soon as they open their mouth, out comes lies. As he said, very old, wise Catholic man who had fled China. And this is this is true of even Freemasons. Okay, and this is why, if you have a party that allows Freemasons in it or is run by or controlled by Freemasons, you're already deceived if you're listening to them, because everything that comes out of their mouth is a lie. A Christian is not going to promise to build a wall and not build a wall. A Christian is not going to promise to increase the amount of Christian refugees coming in and then decrease it by 90%. A Christian is going to help those who vote for him, not help those who don't vote for him. When you see this kind of complete mendacity without any apology, you know you're not dealing with a Christian. So don't tell me a person like that's Christian. He's not a Christian. And if you claim that that's a Christian, you're denigrating yourself as a Christian. Okay. It's kind of like, well, anyone who grows up in a neighborhood and has friends of different religions pretty quickly learns that not all religions are equal. Some friends will be true and some will not. And you may not understand that as a young man. By the time you become an adult, you should realize that some people just don't keep their promises. And some religions are actually taught not to keep their promises. But a person is only going to keep his promise if he comes from a religion and an upbringing that teaches him to be truthful. And no religion teaches that except Christianity. Okay.
Yeah.
Even the Talmud of the Jews says you can break faith with unbelievers. Okay. But only in Christianity it says you should be truthful to everyone. So this shouldn't surprise us, but if we ignore the fact, it can have serious consequences, and a government cannot ignore this fact, and it puts its own citizens in danger. And this is what happened in both of those wars. And besides the mistrust issue, what did the Russians obtain by all these lies?
Well, during all this, they reissued their détente with the U.S. to get these items. A review of the human cost of Soviet double dealing will emphasize the risk we run by such attempts to mellow Soviet statism. In every year since the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviets have murdered their own citizens for political reasons, that is, for alleged or real opposition to the Soviet state. The AFL-CIO has mapped Soviet forced labor camps of the 1960s. Moreover, in every year since 1917, the Soviets have attacked other countries or interfered massively in their internal affairs. For the early years, there is a State Department staff report. Interference of the representatives or employees of the Soviet government abroad in the internal affairs of the countries in which they are stationed. The human cost of the Bolshevik Revolution the ensuing civil war in Russia has been estimated at 7 million Russians. Between 1930 and 1950, more than 20 million Russians died in forced labor camps. Khrushchev personally supervised the massacre of more than 10,000 Ukrainians at Vinnytsia. 20 years later, he was photographed in an embrace with Governor Nelson Rockefeller of New York.
Citibank.
Yep.
And that doesn't even count the 20 million that were starved to death in those years and didn't die in labor camps or die of starvation.
Yeah. Soviet agents were in Spain before the Spanish Civil War of 1936. Unquestionably, had some role in starting it. Cost 275,000 killed. The supply of Soviet armaments to the Spanish Republic is known from material in the records of the German military attaché at Ankara, Turkey. Let's see here. Slavonic and Eastern European Review, June 1960. Soviet arms shipments began in September 1936. Soviet intelligence agents operating in Spain before the war broke out were under General Yolansky, who was also responsible for logistics. In addition to supplies, the Soviets sent 920 military advisors, 70 Air Force officers, 100 other officers, as early as September 1936, and 750 enlisted men from September 1936 to March 1938. About 110 shiploads of Russian military supplies left Odessa en route to Spain, foreshadowing the situation when the USSR supplied Cuba and North Vietnam. Only 32 of these ships were under the Soviet flag, and most of these Soviet flagged vessels were foreign built. 37 ships were British flagged vessels, 23 were Spanish, 17 were Greek. Others were under the Mexican, French, and U.S. flags. Yep. These 110 vessels carried the following armaments to Spain from the new Western-built Soviet plants: tanks and armored cars, planes, mostly fighter aircraft, guns, anti-aircraft guns, trucks. What was the U.S. technical component of these arms? Tanks sent to Spain in 1936 were based on British Vickers or U.S. Christie designs. Soviet aviation technology was mainly American, except for the French Potez and Italian seaplane designs. The guns were Krupp, but the trucks were Ford, Hercules, and Brandt, all from plants built by American firms 5 years previously. After this, in 1937, Stalin's Red Army killed 30,000, the cream of the Soviet military. 2 years later, in 1939, Russia attacked Finland. Cost 273,000 Finns and Russians killed in 1939 or 1940. The Soviets murdered 30,000 Polish officers at Katyn. Yep.
And you know, these people completely diabolical, just killing hundreds of thousands of people, and it doesn't stop them. It doesn't afflict them. It's almost like they get a thrills from it.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on from there.
Mm-hmm. Persecution of Russians and people of Eastern Europe continued after World War II, assisted by the British-American Operation Keelhaul. Files still classified in 1972. In 1946, the Ukrainians tried unsuccessfully to fight for independence. After having fought the Germans for 4 years, one after another, the Eastern European people attempted to overthrow the domestic communism, which survived only with Russian help and American inaction. In 1956, there was another Polish revolt and a major outbreak in Hungary, in which 25,000 Hungarians and 7,000 Russians lost their life.
This reminds me a lot of what we see going on in Armenia right now. It's pretty obvious that Turkey and Azerbaijan couldn't do this if America sat around on its hands. And yet America's sitting around in its hands.
Yeah.
And the target is always Christian peoples. That's always the target. If the target is Christian peoples, the Masonic nations of the world sit in their hands or promote it.
Yeah. In the early 1960s, the Soviets began to look beyond the satellites. Secure in the knowledge that the United States would not intervene to protect human rights in these countries, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. The missile-carrying Soviet ships had engines manufactured by Denmark. Then came the airborne Congo adventure. Then the Vietnamese War, which Soviet advisors, as in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, entered at an early stage in 1965. The year 1,369 Americans were killed in South Vietnam. 2,500 Russian engineers and experts were at work in North Vietnam. Los Angeles Times, August 18th, 1965. And Russian arms were even then in widespread use by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. These arms included the standard 82mm recoilless rifle, the RP-46 light machine gun, and other types of military equipment. This was also the year in which President Johnson decided to expand trade with the Soviets in the guise of building bridges for peace.
The guise is a good word, because Johnson was a Freemason.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, after Kennedy was assassinated, Johnson made sure that everyone on that commission was a Mason, at least nearly everyone. And that has led to the speculation that it was the Masons who were totally behind Kennedy's assassination, the so-called deep state. And
Yeah. How you always wondered about what's going on in Afghanistan and all those areas. Here's the start of it. The continuing crisis in the Middle East has been directly dependent upon the supply of Soviet arms to militant Arab countries and guerrillas. In the 10 years from 1958 to 1968, Soviet arms supply was as follows: Algeria, 200 jets plus tanks and ships; Egypt, 800 jets, 1,200 tanks, and 15 warships; Iraq, 200 jets, 500 tanks, some ships; Syria, 250 jets, 500 tanks, and some ships. Recorded by Jeffrey Kemp, Strategy and Arms Levels. Proceedings of the Academy of Political Science, 1960. So we were arming the bad guys way back when.
indirectly, the Soviets were giving some of their hand-me-down technology, but it just shows you how much evil in the world is promoted by the Lodge, directly and indirectly, and how much the whole history of the 20th century would have been different if there was not a Masonic Lodge, and if there were Christian parties to make sure there weren't Masonic lodges.
Yeah. In subsequent pages, it will be shown that the MiG-15 uses copies of the Royal Royce and German engines, that Soviet tanks derive heavily from Western assistance in technology, that 2/3 of the Russian merchant ships and 4/5 of the main diesel engines of these ships have been built outside the USSR. Yep. Now, folks, we're going to get into the Korean War here. Yep. The American casualty roll in the Korean War was 33,730 killed and 103,284 wounded. Of the 10,218 American prisoners taken by the Communist forces, only 3,746 returned to the United States. 21 men refused repatriation, and 6,451 American servicemen are listed as murdered or died. R. Ernest Dupuy and Trevor N. Dupuy. Encyclopedia of Military History, New York, Harper and Row, 1970, page 1219.
Now that's a fact that I don't think I was ever heard in public school or even on television, that more than 2/3 of all the GIs captured in the Korean War died. They never mentioned that. Were they trying to whitewash the communists, I suppose?
Yeah. This massive casualty toll does not include American allies. Altogether, 118,515 United Nations soldiers were killed, in addition to 70,000 South Korean soldiers and over 3 million South Korean civilians. The 130,000-man North-South Korean Army, which crossed the South Korean border in June 1950, was trained, supported, and equipped by the Soviet Union. This army included a brigade of Soviet T-34 medium tanks with U.S. Christie suspensions. The artillery tractors that pulled the guns are direct metric copies of Caterpillar tractors. The trucks were either from the Henry Ford Gorky plant or the Zell plant. North Korean Air Force had 108 Yak planes built in plants with U.S. Lend-Lease equipment. These Yaks were later replaced by MiG-15s, powered by Russian copies of the Rolls-Royce jet engines, sold to the Soviet Union in 1947. Yeah. American-made tanks, American-made trucks to pull the guns,
Mm-hmm.
and American-made planes.
Mm-hmm. This is why you do not want a Masonic lodge in your country, and why you need Christian parties that will suppress and eliminate Masonic control in your country, because they will actually use your entire economy to kill your own sons and daughters.
American casualties from the Soviet action did not cease between the Korean and Vietnamese wars. Between January 1950 and May 1964, when the Vietnamese War entered its full-scale ground stage, the U.S. Air Force lost 108 airmen killed or missing from various hostile Soviet actions, in addition to 26 aircraft shot down. Oh boy. The Vietnam War numbers. The real ones. Okay. Between 1961 and 1964, the American casualty roll in Vietnam was relatively light. All casualty data are from Tile Directorate for Statistical Services, Office of the Secretary of Defense. Killed and wounded among American forces as a result of hostile action were as follows: 1961, 11 killed, 2 wounded. 1962, 31 killed, 41 wounded. 1963, 78 killed, 218 wounded. 64, 147 killed, 522 wounded. Then in 1965, the Soviets stepped up the flow of supplies to North Vietnam. President Johnson stepped up the flow of technology to the Soviets, and the American toll mounted rapidly. So, in 1964, there was only 147 killed. In 1965, after the trades, 1,369 Americans killed, 3,308 wounded. And it goes up. 66, 5,000 killed, 16,526 wounded. 67, 9,378 killed, 32,371 wounded. 68, 14,592 killed, 46,799 wounded. After President Nixon took office in 69, the American toll was as follows: 69, 9,414 killed, 32,940 wounded. 1970, 4,221 killed, 15,211 wounded, 71, 1,380 killed, 4,767 wounded, 1972, 300 killed, 587 wounded.
And then the U.S. withdraws.
Yeah. About 80% of the armaments and supplies for the Vietnamese War came from the Soviet Union, and a key part of the President Nixon's policy is to transfer technology to the USSR. Soviet military aid has a course of being fundamental for the North vets. In September 1967, the Institute of Strategic Studies in London reported that the Soviets had sent large numbers of MiG-17s and MiG-21 fighters, Ilyushin-28 light bombers, transport aircraft, helicopters, 6,000 anti-aircraft guns, one-half radar controlled, surface-to-air guideline missiles, 200 and 250 missile launchers, several thousand air defense machine guns, and a training mission of about 1,000 men to North Vietnam. Yeah. What to say?
The statistics are only the they tell you the magnitude of the problem. If you've ever seen war documentaries on Vietnam, which are almost never shown anymore, you realize how absolutely horrible of a war it was, and the rules of engagement were even crazy, and the way they fought the war was crazy, and even that they were fighting the war was crazy, because they never attempted to support a native government. They made the war as much as possible appear like America was invading, and that got the Vietnamese people to tend to side with the Viet Cong, whose propaganda they said, we're defending you from a foreign invasion, but it was quite the contrary. They never attempted to really win that war the correct way. Just spend more money, build up the American military establishment, and throw the young men of America through a meat grinder.
Yeah. This aid was confirmed in April 1967 in the testimony of former Assistant Secretary of Defense John T. McNaughton to the effect that the Soviet had supplied the sophisticated equipment in the field of anti-aircraft defense. The loss of 915 U.S. planes over North Vietnam between February 1965, the date of the first U.S. air operations over North Vietnam, and the bombing halt of November 1st, 1968, testifies to the accuracy and utility of the Soviet equipment. After President Nixon took office in January 1969, and expanded technical transfers, losses mounted, rising to a total of more than 4,000 U.S. aircraft by the end of 1972. It would appear from this statistic alone that increased trade leads to increased aircraft losses. Another testimonial is the 539 U.S. Air Force personnel killed between 1965 and 1968 in Vietnam. Further, Soviet military assistance was confirmed in an agreement signed by Casualties and Deputy Premier Nagy in July 1968. Support of the Soviet Union for North Vietnamese aggression in South Vietnam has been no secret. Brezhnev, on the occasion of his visit to Bulgaria on May 12, 1967, demonstrated the solidarity of supposedly polycentrist socialist East Europe on the question of Vietnam. You know well, my comrades, that the Soviet Union is rendering great economic, military, and political assistance to fighting Vietnam. This assistance is merged with the assistance coming from Bulgaria and other fraternal socialist countries. We are rendering it in response to the command of the hour as people reared by the Communist Party in a spirit of proletarian internationalism, in a spirit of high understanding of class task. And let the aggressors know this: fighting Vietnam will never be left without the help of its true friends. Our answer has been and will continue to be commensurate with the requirements of an effective rebuff to the unbridled imperialist interventionists. Bravada, May 13th, 1967. Yep, help of its true friends. I guess that's what America was.
It serves the military industrial establishment because if you supply airplanes to the United States and they're not shot down, then you can't sell them anymore. But if they're shot down, you can keep selling them. And to think that these people would actually not care of the pilots being killed is tremendous, but it's in fact the case, because the whole project is to pump money out of the public treasury into Masonic banks so that they can get more and more control. And we see now the flowering of the worldwide control and the scamdemic, which is complete Masonic fraud, but it's out for total one world government, total enslaver of every human being, to suffocate you with a mask and lock you out of your business, your church, your school.
Yeah. Soviet political support is, of course, well founded in Leninist philosophy. Since the days of Lenin, Soviet objectives have only changed in the imagination of Washington policymakers. The Soviet Union provided both the military and economic means for the North Vietnamese invasion of South Vietnam, and the trade figures measure this assistance. In the mid-1950s, the value of Soviet exports to North Vietnam came to no more than $3 million per year. By 1966, this has rocketed to $68.2 million. And a year later, the figure doubled to $148 million. In return, the North Viets shipped to Soviet Russia only 25.3 million worth of goods in 1966 and 1967, while imports from the USSR doubled. Vietnamese exports slumped even further to $20.9 million. Thus, at the key juncture of the Vietnamese War, tile Soviets were not only rapidly increasing their supplies, but were receiving in return less than 1/7 the value of the supplies in Vietnamese products. The balance was Soviet lend-lease for the takeover of South Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. And this is what made it hard for the American public to understand. How could this little country fight and defeat the United States? But it wasn't a little country, and even Russia is not the explanation, because Russia couldn't have done it without the help of the United States either. So it all traces back to the same people, the bankers in New York.
Mm-hmm. The Soviet Union has truly been the arsenal for revolution in Vietnam, and as Shirley Chevalier wrote in Barron's Weekly, the United States has been the arsenal for communism in the Soviet Union. God bless her. January 4th, 1971. Boom.
So, we're not saying anything new. This was said 50 years ago, and we're telling you to wake up and smell the coffee, okay? And but though this was said in Barron's magazine in 71, I never heard it. This is the first I heard of it in just the last week or so, speaking about Sutton. So it took 50 years for that news to get out. It's coming out through Order Militaris Radio TV. So we're not telling you really news. But why aren't the others telling you about this? Why haven't your Catholic newspapers told you about this? Why haven't all the talking heads talked about this? Why is it always focus your intention on Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican? Don't look at anything else. Don't look at anything else. Your salvation is
Trump.
Democrat or Republican. And that's your salvation. That's your religion. Don't even look at Bergoglio saying that homosexuals should be married. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. No, you got to just look at Trump. He's your savior. Jesus Christ, well, that's in the Bible. I totally believe the Bible. They're complete hypocrites.
Yeah.
They're not Catholic. These people are not Catholic. They're acting like complete Freemasons
Mm-hmm.
because they're totally invested in controlling your attention away from the truth of what's really going on in the world. And that is the Masonic takeover of the world. And the only way to oppose that is through a Catholic counter revolution, and that has to be political. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
at least it has to be political. It can't just be praying. Surely we should pray, but the Crusaders did not take Jerusalem by saying the Rosary. Okay, and the people who tell you should only pray, they're pietists, and they're actually telling you to disarm yourself. And
Yeah.
that's really Freemasonry, because no Catholic in the Middle Ages would say, "If we just pray,"
Yeah.
you know, they would say you're insane.
Yeah. Now, to our Vietnam vets who are the early special forces who went to look for the went to surveil the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This is your area right here, folks. And bad news, even more. So each year in the spring, North Vietnamese have attempted to conquer the South. In 1972, in their latest attempt, a full-scale invasion was launched with various kinds of heavy equipment they had not previously used. The tanks, guns, trucks came from the Soviet Union and were produced in plants erected and equipped by American and European companies. The T-54 tanks was used in the force in early 1972. The T-54 has a modified Christie-type suspension. The gas trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail came from the Ford-built Gorky plant. The diesel trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail came from the Brant-built plant. Both plants were equipped with new American machinery while the Vietnamese War was in progress. The amphibious PT-76 tank is manufactured at Volgograd in a factory built by 80 U.S. firms. This is called peaceful trade by the mystics in Washington.
Hmm. Well, they were calling it peaceful trade because it's really Masonic trade, and they couldn't tell you that. They couldn't openly tell you what's going on.
Yeah. Special Operations Forces, lightly, armed. Go against that, you're nuts.
Hmm.
Jeez.
It's crazy.
As the material presented in this book will show, the arsenal for revolution was built by Western firms, has been kept in operation with a peaceful trade. While all the rhetoric about peaceful trade is boiled out, it comes down to a single inescapable fact. The guns, the ammunition, the weapons, the transportation systems that killed Americans in Vietnam came from American subsidized economy of the Soviet Union. The trucks that carried these weapons down the Ho Chi Minh Trail came from American-built planes. The ships that carried the supplies to Chicanville and Haiphong came from NATO allies and used propulsion systems that our State Department could have kept out of Soviet hands. Indeed, the Export Control Act and the Battle Act, ignored by the state, required exactly such action. The only other route for these supplies was by rail across Siberia and China, but Soviet locomotives and railroad operating equipment have also been traced to the US and European origins.
Hmm. When I was growing up, we were told that the Soviet Union was some kind of economic miracle, that communism had built a strong, bustling, and fervent economy. And this showed how wonderful communism is. It was complete propaganda. Now you see what was really going on.
Mhm. Which way we cut the cake, there is only one logical, inescapable conclusion. The technical capability to wage the Korean and Vietnam wars originated on both sides in Western, mainly American technology, and the political illusion of peaceful trade was the carriers for this war-making technology. As U.S. casualties in Vietnam mounted, The lessons of history were clear for those with eyes to see. Reduce trade with USSR and all suppliers to North Vietnam must provide an incentive for other side to decelerate the conflict. This is not hindsight. The writer made this argument in print in the mid-1960s. Both the Johnson and Nixon administrations irrationally, illogically chose to expand trade. The carrier for the technology required to fuel the North Vietnamese side of the war, and so voted to continue the war. The more Hanoi stoked up the war, more Soviet Russia received from the United States. American policy, wittingly or unwittingly, was guaranteed not only to maintain the Vietnamese war, but to expand it, increase our losses, and compound the problem of preserving South Vietnam.
And well, why would the Masonic government really want to basically pretend to protect the South Korean government, but actually betray them? And this I didn't understand for a long time. It wasn't until a few years I realized I found it out. And this was we were never told this in the press in the United States. You know who governed South Korea? I mean, South Vietnam?
Mm,
The government was Catholic. Did you know that?
mm,
It's a Buddhist country, but the government was Catholic and had ruled since the time of the French. Now it doesn't have a Catholic government because America lost the war and the Catholic government was wiped out. But it was a Catholic government. I'm not saying it was the best of Catholic governments, but nevertheless, it was a Catholic government. So here we have an analogous case where the Americans go to Russia and defend the white, supports the whites against the Bolsheviks, but doesn't really support the whites and really funds the Bolsheviks and actually lets the whites get destroyed.
mm-hmm.
The exact same thing that happens in Vietnam. Oh, we're going to protect the Catholic government. We're here to protect you.
Yeah.
So this is Freemasonry, and this is why you need a Christian government. Because if you don't have a Christian government, you're going to have a government stabs Christians in the back or lets them get stabbed in the back.
Yep.
And
Yeah. Yeah. So to all of our veterans out there who went through this hell, and those who didn't make it back or didn't want to come back because they knew they like something off about this. It's like now you know why, folks.
yeah, and Nixon, well, Nixon was a Brown Brothers Harriman, Republican. Okay, so if you want to know who's responsible for Vietnam, go to 140 Broadway Street in New York, the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. They're the people who caused that war to kill all your sons and daughters.
Mm-hmm.
Your brothers, sisters, your uncles, aunts.
Yeah.
They're the ones that were behind the whole thing.
Yeah. So next week will be chapter 3 in this book. You're going to learn why you never heard of any of this in the press. He goes into the censorship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the key things that Masons used to keep themselves in power, the complete censoring of anyone who speaks them out. This is why during the course of this series where we've exposed what the Masons have been responsible for in the 20th century, they attack our corporation, which is not this radio station, but they attack it and they take away all our ability to receive online payments.
Mm-hmm.
Shut down information that's contrary, silence it and cause it to be forgotten. And that's why all those other Catholic talking heads out there who know our shows and watch them, because a few days later, many of them repeat our topics. They're not going to say anything about that we were banned by Stripe. They won't say anything about that because they're part of the system of control. If they were Catholic, they would rally to any Catholic that was being persecuted. We're an international association to defend Catholics from persecution, and they've never at once promoted us for 4 years. Let's use an example. Let's say an international association forms to promote devotion to the Sacred Heart, but no Catholic organization will even admit exists. Are they devoted to the Sacred Heart?
Mm.
or do they hate the Sacred Heart?
And
So if we're an association, we've been out there 4 years to defend Christians from persecution, they won't even tell anyone we exist, and when we're persecuted, remain silent. Are they Catholic,
nope,
or are they enemies of the church?
enemies.
So anyone out there who's listening to us, you need to wake up and please share our programs and let people know, because now the only way we can get support is the old-fashioned way, through a check through the mail. And we don't think there'll be any other way, because the level of control is so much. So we encourage you to invest actually in Ordo Militar Sync. This is something we need to do. Our hands are tied. We can't do anything because no one's investing. All we can do is do free shows, and we can't receive much donations anymore. So we need investment so we can start business activities that can support the good works of the order. If we just sit around begging for money every year, well, that would work if the followers increase every year. But every time we start some apostolate, we get cut down, and we get deplatformed. So now we have our own network, but I'm sure that if this gets effective, Ordo Militaris Radio, they're going to try to shut us down. If we had investment, then we could have our own servers and tied right to the internet, and they couldn't shut us down, but we don't have that, so we're still vulnerable. So if you don't help us as quick as possible, then you won't hear us anymore. Probably in a year or two, they'll shut us off the channels we use to promote these programs, and that will be the last you hear of us. Okay. Because you weren't willing to help the message of truth when it came out. And the Masons want you not to act, because if you don't act, then they win. One thing about the Masons are they're very active, they're very zealous, they're very faithful to their cause. They never give up. And so they try to attack Christians on the same basis. They try to cause you to give up. They try to discourage you. They try to attack the most successful apostolates. They try to silence real truth, Catholic truth. And if you allow it to happen, then you're collaborating in the Masonic system. And on the day of judgment, Christ is going to ask you, okay? And I'm not saying you have to come and defend us. There's a lot of good groups out there. But which one is attacking the problem head on? Which one is attacking the problem head on? And the ones who are actually going after the problem head on, they're the ones you should support, not the ones who are making believe the problems don't exist. Oh, but his words were mistranslated. That's not really what he said. After 7 years, you should see through that game.
Yeah. So if you want to send in a donation by mail, go to ordo-militaris.us. Go to the contact page. You'll see the mailing address. And thank you, and please be generous. And also, the mailing address is on our show pages now. So that's one way to find it.
Yeah, and so if you want to send a donation for the Apostolate Ordo Militaris Radio TV, in the memo of your check, write Ordo Militaris Radio TV, but the check has to be made payable to Ordo Militaris, okay? And then we'll see that it goes to that apostolate.
Yep. So this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.